Hello, good evening, and welcome to today's edition of Old Romans Unscripted. And we've got a full house here today, I'm glad to say. Let's just try and get everyone on the screen. So, as you can see, we've got Brother Stanislaus, excellent, joining us from Detroit, Michigan. Welcome, Brother Stanislaus.
Thank you, Excellency. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Good to see you looking well. That's excellent.
Yes. Thank you.
We've missed you. We have missed you.
Thank you. I've missed you.
Excellent. Welcome to Father Thomas with us during his lunch break from a car park in Chicago. And then from his retreat residence, we have Bishop Kelly. Welcome, Bishop Kelly.
Hello there. How are you?
Great. And everything so far seems to be working. So that's good.
Good.
Because the retreat residence is somewhere out in the sticks. And we weren't sure that Bishop Kelly would be able to tune in. But so far, so good. So of your charity, keep your prayers going for that while we're on air. It is, of course, it was actually All Hallows Eve. For those of us in the UK, liturgically now, after First Vespers, it's All Saints' Day officially. But for those of you in other places in the world, including our three guests this evening in America, it's still All Hallows Eve for you. Nonetheless, I thought it would be a good opportunity, actually, for us to begin our discussion this evening on All Hallows Eve, or as it is perhaps more popularly known, Halloween. Now, of course, we have been infested, I think is the right term, here in the UK, with a certain tradition that comes from your guys' side of the pond, where little children dress up as ghouls and walk around malevolently threatening people with trick or treat. I've successfully managed to avoid answering the door this evening, although we have instituted here in our neighborhood a little system whereby people have to put a pumpkin lantern in their window to denote that they are a safe place for children to ask for sweeties, or candy, as you say in the States. But what is... there are mixed, of course, appreciations of this, what has to be said, basically a commercial started tradition. But perhaps, Bishop Kelly, you might kick things off, because you, of course, originating from this side of the pond, it must have come as quite a shock to you, the level that of seriousness, actually, with which Halloween is celebrated your side of the pond now.
Yes, I mean, hands up, we are responsible for Halloween.
By we, you mean the Irish?
The Irish are, yes. It was originally around this time of year. It's known as the Feast of Samhain. It was a Celtic holiday or celebration, and it was that the night where the should I say maybe the veil between this world and the netherworld was the thinnest, and people would carve not pumpkins, turnips, which are much more difficult to carve.
Yeah. Especially from an Irish ground.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, I think some places in the UK would call them Swedes. In the United States, you would know them as rutabaga. Those things are as hard as iron. But anyway, and we have sort of preserved examples of ancient ones that had fallen into peaty ground and were preserved. But they had ghoulish, ugly faces on it, and it was to scare away evil spirits. And people would put them in front of their doors, put a light in them, and because the veil was so thin, that it would scare away any evil spirit that would be wandering around. And of course, with the advent of Christianity, which Christianity often does, it Christianizes these festivals, and it was moved to the eve before All Saints. So you have this sort of evil or bad, maleficence sort of atmosphere the night before you celebrate All Saints, where all are redeemed, that they don't live in a netherworld, that they live and bask in the glory of Christ. So it Christianized that feast. Now, the old tradition still hung on. People still carved their jack-o'-lanterns and put them out, but it had been Christianized. It was a way of understanding the Feast of All Saints. So you have the sort of the evil of the underworld, All Saints, and then you have All Souls, which is purgatory. So the three sort of follow in succession. And there are all sorts of things too. People would bake apple tarts or apple pies in the United States. And they put a wedding ring in it, and they put a branch in it and a piece of cloth, and it would mean various things. If you got a slice, you'd marry within a year. If you got a coin, you'd be prosperous, that sort of thing. And that happens, of course, you see that certainly in France with on the Feast of the Three Kings. And there's also a traditional sort of sweet loaf or bread made called barnbrack, which also has a similar theme to it. And people would gather together, and they have games and seasonal games, so ducking for apples and all that sort of stuff. And that was the Halloween I grew up in, with no trick-or-treating. I mean, you didn't go around people's houses trick-or-treat. But, in the house, I remember my grandfather would put an apple on a string between a door wedge, and you had to try and, with your hands behind your back, you had to try and eat the apple. And of course, dunking for apples and cracking nuts, and of course you'd have your piece of apple tart, and it was too dangerous for children to carve those turnips, but grandpa or dad would carve a turnip. It would be exciting to put your candle in it, and it was a real candle too. You'd melt the wax in it in order to anchor the candle, and you'd put it out. And I remember running out as a child just to see if it was still lit and the wind hadn't blown it out. And so that was the Halloween I grew up with. And I moved to the United States, and then it was a whole, of course, aware of it through movies and stuff. But yes, the whole trick-or-treating and dressing up and all of that sort of thing. And, the turnip has now become the pumpkin. And having carved both, God bless the pumpkin, because it's much easier to carve. A nastier thing you've ever put your hand in, but much easier to carve.
Well, and at least your side now less seedy than ours.
Yeah, there are a lot of seeds.
Ours are just full of seeds.
Actually, I detest pumpkin, and lots of orange foods I don't like, sweet potatoes as well. But and I'm not fond of carrots either. Perhaps that's a green-orange thing. I don't know. Anyway,
let's not go there.
But I will say, if you roast the pumpkin seeds, they're quite delicious actually. So then returning to Ireland, and then in coming to England, where my brother and his family are. you see this American version of Halloween having returned. So it's like, in an Irish perspective, we had it, for 1,500 years. It was exported to the United States and regurgitated back in this new sort of commercialized form, where people are buying these costumes. You've got the sexy vampire nun and it's sexy everything these days. These costumes, and the kids are trick or treating, and I mean, we would dress up, and it would be bin liners and paper hats, and you buy a witch's mask or something, and these awful plastic things that you couldn't breathe in. Funny that's coming back. But I wonder, does it qualify? Anyway, so it has taken on a sort of a new thing on your perspective, but here in the United States, it's been part of the culture for quite a long time. If you know that the film or musical Meet Me in St. Louis with Judy Garland, where they're out trick-or-treating and she gets injured. And so it has been part of the culture here and developed its own flavor to it. It may have originated with Irish immigrants, but it has become an American thing. And obviously, it wouldn't take root if people didn't enjoy it. If children didn't enjoy trick or treating, if they didn't enjoy dressing up and that sort of thing. But and then there's now, I don't want to talk too long because there's many other guests, but there's this thing that which originated with Protestant evangelicals, saying that Christians cannot celebrate Halloween. It's a demonic festival. It's evil, and Christians should stay away. I mean, I think that's nonsense. It's certainly, if you remember, it's not nonsense. I think certain groups like the Wicca and Satanists have hijacked Halloween, but that's new. That's novel. If you remember, for 1,500 years, this feast of Halloween has been is part of the Christian narrative, that over the span of 3 days, that you are aware of the damned. You're aware the very next day of the church glorious, and you are aware of the church suffering. And I think that puts a very different spin on it. And that is the traditional Halloween.
Yeah. Thank you for that. For the history. Brother Stanislaus, I'm just wondering if your Hispanic Latino upbringing perhaps had another cultural slant on Halloween.
Yes, I think so, because one is that I refer to myself as Mexican. So the Mexican tradition is very old. I was surprised, at least to what I could hear, because my internet connection is bad, but I was surprised to learn of some of these things from Ireland. I had never known that. In Mexico, the Day of the Dead is huge. It's always been huge. Now, it's been commercialized like it's been in the United States, but growing up in the South near Mexico, we were always taught that Halloween came from the Mexican tradition of same thing. The All Hallows Eve is when we're closest to the church suffering, and so the Mexican people would go to the cemetery at midnight or dark, and they picnic to be close to their loved ones. And people, some would dress up as ghosts or skeletons, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. That's graduated, but I think then the whole thing was to kind of prepare for All Souls Day, because Mexicans are mostly Catholic, at least they used to be. So there's a great history with All Hallows Eve from the Mexican tradition, and it's what we thought of. Now, the only thing, I love Halloween. I always have. And I know the argument about the demonic and all that, and that's a fair argument, I think. But I think the innocence of Halloween is what we've lost. In the United States, when I was growing up, I missed all of Halloween because of the cyanide poisonings that happened in the early 80s or late 70s. And so in this country, Halloween was canceled for many years. You wouldn't go anywhere because there were people putting razor blades and cyanide and things like that in the treats. So Halloween, as far as I know, it was my nieces and nephews who got to enjoy what was present in the early 70s, that what wasn't there in the late 70s and 80s and probably even the early 90s. So in a way, what I see now is the United States is just now getting back to these big Halloween celebrations. And again, I was tempted to put out a couple of Halloween decorations that I have with me, but I thought, well, I don't know how others feel about it. I have no problem with a jack-o'-lantern, with even a ghost or something like that being. Those are fun to me, and I tried to make it fun for my family, and using it as an opportunity to talk about the Holy Souls and the history and what it means. And I got these young kids' ears now. I'm playing with them and we're having fun because it's Halloween. But they're also, at least with me, I'm trying to teach them about what we're really getting ready to celebrate. Going into All Saints and then to All Souls, and how important that is, and the importance to really to pray for the dead. I think you probably saw that I did that funeral oration for my uncle, and I did use it I on purpose as an opportunity to try to catechize, because people have not been catechized. We know that. That's the problem. I'm sure across the world, but we're here, and I'm here in Detroit, and it's people don't know. And when they begin to find out, they're really interested, and I think they appreciate it.
Yeah, that is a real thing at the moment that I think many people within the church have failed to grasp, is just how poor and lacking the level of catechesis is in the church today. One can't just assume, as one did in times past, that everybody knew basically what All Saints Day was, or Christmas was, or Easter was, etc. You can't make those assumptions anymore. The level of secularization in our Western culture now is such that other than the names of those holidays, many people are ignorant of what they're celebrating. And the truth is, sadly, that even within the church, the paucity of catechesis is such that there are many people ignorant again of the significance of these feasts, and of our traditions, and indeed of our own Catholic culture, both ethnic and universal. Father Tom, now you're a little younger than the rest of us, and I would guess experienced the full-blown commercial side of Halloween. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, definitely full everything. Knew very little to anything about the purpose or history of All Hallows Eve. It was a way to see how much candy I could get and rack up the dental bills, pretty much. That was Halloween. It's funny listening to the three stories of this day. It's like, and I'm the one that lived it, like, in the sense, like, all that hodgepodgeness, that's what my generations younger, that we're the product of that, I guess, in a sense. And it's only when you get to learn the faith, because I didn't know the faith. I grew up novice auto Catholic. I barely knew what a rosary was. I could say the Our Father, maybe like you grow up with knowing very little to anything. You just go through motion. And when you start learning the history, you start learning the Catholic roots of it, you discover a way to celebrate it that means so much more. And it's not about the candy. It's not about bobbing for apples. It's not about all that. It's about taking a day to prepare, in a sense, you're entering this triduum, for the dead. And even in the Mass today, the Vigil Mass, which, very few traditionalists actually even hold, having the Vigil of All Saints. That's even gone away with a lot of so-called traditionalists. That Mass, you go through the propers, you go through the readings, and it's a beautiful liturgy. It's a beautiful Mass to really put you mind, body, and soul into it. So I had my youthful sweet tooth, if you will. I didn't get too many cavities. I still have all my teeth. But it is something that when you start sharing just little bits of, as Brother Stanislaus was saying, catechizing people, you inform them, you show them there's something more to this day than just candy and dressing up. They actually are like, whoa, really? And they want to learn more. And it's always funny. It's like with all the secular holidays that we have, or the secularized Catholic holidays, it's a flattering aspect for us Catholics, really, that the world thinks so highly of us that they need to abuse and misuse our feast days to make themselves feel better about the lowliness they're in. Now, we know as Catholics we're supposed to, catechize, evangelize them, and show them there's a better way to live life. But it's a food for thought that it's a great time to evangelize. So and really share the truth.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity, perhaps, to reclaim our traditions, and to, as you say, to catechize and evangelize. I should just say that just to put Bishop Kelly's nerves at ease, but I'm sure he's worked it out, that there is another festival here in the UK that's celebrated shortly that isn't very flattering actually to us as Catholics, because it's about the celebration of the foiling of a supposed Catholic plot to blow up King James I, known as Bonfire Night. And this weekend it seems to have conflated with Halloween. So I deliberately left my blind up just in case we were able to see any of the pretty fireworks that periodically are going off in the background. But if you hear explosions, that's what it is. It's the fireworks going off in the background. It's not because World War III has started in the UK. Right. Let's thanks all for your contributions there. Very interesting. But I think we ought to start really with some of our serious discussion. So if it's all the same with you, I will introduce our first topic for discussion. Okay, so on Thursday, of course, this week, here in France, 3 people were attacked and died, and several others were injured in a knife attack that took place in the Basilica of Our Lady of the Assumption in Nice, France. The perpetrator was an Islamist who as a fundamentalist religionist who screamed Allah Akbar as he committed this heinous act of murder and sacrilege. Now here, of course, this side of the pond, it's caused something of a stir, if only because, for example, today here in the UK, there were Muslims protesting outside the French embassy, despite this event on Thursday, complaining, protesting President Macron's his what's the word? His standing by free speech, or principle of free speech, and the publication by Charlie Hebdo magazine of unflattering cartoon depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. Bishop Kelly, what was your reaction, and what are your thoughts on this situation?
Well, of course, it's incredibly tragic, and sad to see that that these people who gave their lives to Christ, which I believe they did, and the sacrilege of a church. It just, I mean, I think that speaks for itself, so I won't talk about that anymore. But I was curious. I know the church. My parents live. They have a sort of a summer house not too far from Nice, and I know the church quite well, having visited many times. And it's. I was sort of. I was thinking about the reaction to it, and of course the obvious parallel is with the priest. Was it Hempel or Hemel?
Jacques Hemel, yeah.
In the sanctuary, it was it Rouen?
Near Rouen, in Normandy,
Rouen.
yeah.
And then of course, was it last week the teacher was beheaded?
Yeah, Samuel Paty.
It's curious to see that when the teacher was beheaded, that there were marches and protests on the street, that it sort of galvanized a sort of a national response. Not so much with the three here at Nice. I think it's a reflection, a sad reflection, of the fact that France is still a secular country, that it still lives under the gloom of the French Revolution. However, I think that this is getting a bit more response because it is so close to the populist, sacred, secular event the week before. I was absolutely appalled at the Pope's response. It just, in fact, I got a message from one of the faithful that said that she couldn't believe and was in tears at the Pope's response, and that the Catholic Church lacks leadership utterly. And I agree with her. His response basically was, we should learn to love each other as brothers. And instead of condemning it, it sounds nice. It's a great soundbite. But it should have been condemned. The recognition of the sacrifice of the victims, should have come from the Pope. And but to lead with one of the three tenets of the French Revolution, fraternité, just goes to show Francis's agenda of this one world, this one, we are all brothers, and we should love and respect each other as brothers, and get. I thought it was a weak response. It didn't go far enough. It probably gave no consolation to the family of the victims, and from what I have heard, very little consolation to the Christian flock broader. As you say at home, what do you expect from a horse but a kick? We should be used to this now from him, but sometimes you're still let down, and I probably need to get over that. But I thought his response was poor, and of course today, just before I came on, apparently an Orthodox priest was shot in Lyon.
Yeah, that's right.
And it'll take a week before we hear it was an Islamic terrorist, but for 7 days we'll be told it was unknown and a deranged person. But it's we're under attack, and we need to stand up. Of course, we're called to love our brothers, but we're not called to lie down. And we as Christians are soldiers for Christ, and we need to stand up for it. And this placating of the media, this sort of wanting to fit into the zeitgeist of that Islam is a religion of peace. There was a scholar on during the week that said the beheading made it a ritual religious killing, because in the Quran that Muhammad, I'm going to stop calling him the Prophet Muhammad, as the media refers to him as the Prophet Muhammad. He's no more a prophet than my dog. But Muhammad states in the Quran that if you find an unbeliever among you on the battlefield, you shall slice their throats from ear to ear. And that is directly from the Quran. So you see, this beheading makes it a religious killing for these fundamentalists. I'm not saying all Muslims, of course, but the fundamentalists make it a religious killing. So it's deeply disturbing. The images of those Christians along the beach in North Africa who would not renounce Christ at the very end. We're living in tough times, and people aren't aware of it because the media is reluctant to report it. But we have to be aware of it. We have to be ready for it, because it may come to our door. These people were early in the morning praying in a public church, and martyrdom came to them. It could happen to each and every one of us. I mean, all of us here live our lives wearing overt Christian garb. We were sitting ducks. So we need to be aware. We need to be vigilant. The words of St. Paul, but the devil is wandering around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour.
Yeah, it was actually in the context of waiting for Mass, for the first Mass to begin, that the attack took place in. And the sacristan, who was busy preparing the sanctuary for the Mass, was one of the three victims. Victor Locke was his name. He was the father of two daughters. And Simone Barrios Silva was the other woman. There were two women who were attacked. So far unnamed is the older woman who was practically decapitated inside the basilica. And then Simone, who is actually a Brazilian national, but had moved to France. She was aged 44 and had managed. She was, she'd been attacked, stabbed, but had managed to crawl from the basilica to a nearby cafe to raise the alarm. But her dying words were, tell my children that I love them. And she has 3 children. It really is an awful tragedy. And one of the things that upset me about it was it's kind of usual now, of course, but the kind of acceptance that somehow this was kind of not news in terms of its significance for us as Christians. The thought that kept going through my mind most of the day was, if 3 people had been murdered in a mosque, or murdered in a synagogue, or murdered in a Buddhist or Sikh temple or meditation center, a lot more would have been made out of it. And the relevant religious leaders would have been interviewed and asked for comment. I mean, as usual, there was a kind of media blackout, as it were, from the spiritual and religious perspective, even though this was clearly a religiously motivated attack. And in fact, all of these incidents, that was one of 3 to occur on that day alone, and one of half dozen that have occurred in the last 2 weeks. All of them have been religiously motivated, because it is all to do with these cartoon depictions of Muhammad. Now, it's worth pointing out that actually Charlie Hebdo has been similarly blasphemous and disrespectful to Christians in their cartoon portrayals of our religion and indeed of religious leaders. But of course, we don't respond by going around murdering people. Neither do we go around protesting, though a part of me wonders why we don't do the latter. I certainly wouldn't be for Christians going around, however righteously or just they may think the cause. I certainly couldn't condone any violent retribution. But I certainly do wonder at why it is we as Christians don't protest, why we don't get together and march more often than we do than the once a year March for Life rally, respectively, in America and here in the UK. I had to prompt. We have a system here in this city. There is a network of religious and ethnic, cultural and faith groups called One Voice. And the point is that when an event like this happens, the various faith groups and cultural communities, ethnic communities, are called upon to issue a joint statement, usually, expressing support and sympathy for the victims and families and condemning the event that has taken place. So, for example, when the New Zealand mosque murders occurred, and a statement from One Voice was issued on behalf of us all, and we gathered for a candlelight vigil. Likewise, when 12 people in a Jewish mosque in America a couple of years back were likewise killed, murdered in their synagogue. Likewise, a One Voice statement was issued, and a vigil was arranged. On this occasion, Nothing. I heard nothing from the One Voice coordinator. And I'm chair of the city's faith council. So I arranged for the staff member to send an email to the One Voice coordinator and ask, will One Voice be issuing a statement about the tragedy in Nice? And eventually a statement was cobbled together. A few phone calls late yesterday between various faith leaders and ethnic communities, and a statement was cobbled together and issued. But that took almost 2 days, whereas on previous occasions it's happened within 12 hours. And it only happened because I pushed, how I work. I suggested to someone that someone might want to suggest that something was done, and eventually it was. And then when that statement
was the vigil well attended?
Oh, we haven't had a vigil.
I expected so.
Yeah, no one's talked about a vigil, and yet that's usually one of the first things that's talked about or arranged. But nobody's talked about a vigil. And I couldn't help but note that when the statement, so we were all invited to contribute words for the statement, as the only Christian faith leader who was asked for a statement, I couldn't help but note that my words were reduced to a sentence, whereas others had paragraphs. Now, part of me thinks, well, is this because Christian martyrdom is in fact reaching genocidal proportions globally, and thus people think, oh, well, it would be ridiculous to issue statements and hold vigils all the time? Or is it just that because we as Christians ourselves have been so quiet, acquiescent, apathetic for so long, that nobody thinks that we might be upset or, otherwise bothered about such a situation? Now, bearing in mind, it was the British Home Office only last year that founded a commission and asked for a report on Christian persecution and martyrdom worldwide. It was that report, that commission's report, that concluded that Christian persecution worldwide was reaching genocidal levels. Now, genocide is a term that we use for things like the Cambodian genocide, for the Serbian genocide, for the Russian and Chinese communist genocides, for the Shoah, for the Holocaust, for the Jewish genocide of World War II. That's what genocide means. That's the level that we're talking about here. And it just seems, incredible to me that even those who are supposedly woke and switched on to the sensitivities of cultures and faiths didn't bother to seek out of their own volition a response, or even to just reach out to us as Christians about this event. Now, personally, I'm of the opinion, and anyone who's heard my conferences and homilies this week will know that I'm personally of the opinion that actually it's time for us as Christians, particularly here, for example, in the UK, where we have the same protected categories of about discrimination as LGBTs and women and people of BMAER communities, etc. But as people of faith, but particularly as Christians, we've done nothing in the past few years to highlight, to emphasize, to protest, to make known our particular perspectives or feelings about various issues that have taken place and various changes in policy, government-wide and locally, concerning curricula, the nature of stuff that is being taught in schools, through to various discriminatory policies in the workplace, etc. I mean, for one of the things that has always baffled me, for example, is why Christians are taken to employment tribunals and courts for wearing a cross on a necklace, or for wearing a cross on a lapel, or for offering to pray for a patient if they're a nurse. People have been taken to court for that, but nobody would think of stopping a Muslim woman from wearing a hijab in her place of work. Nobody would consider stopping a Sikh man from wearing his turban in his place of work. And yet we as Christians, we've just sort of, just allowed, to be honest, we have been and are discriminated against differently from people of other faiths. Well, here in the UK, for example, with the equality laws, etc., certain offices, government offices particularly, in London, for example, and other major cities, are required to have prayer rooms. Now, those prayer rooms are not chapels. They are not places of multi-faith sanctuary. They're not open for others to pray in. They're only for Muslim members of staff. And when seasons like Ramadan occur, Muslim workers, Muslim colleagues, are able to start and end their working day, even by holding their breaking fast iftar at sunset on employer premises. But Christians are told, no, you can't have the day off for Maundy Thursday, you can't have the day off for Good Friday, you can't have any time off to observe a holy day of obligation. No, you can't wear overtly Christian symbols in the workplace. No, you can't talk about your faith with other people, etc. Now, I've checked and checked again the Equalities Act 2010, which covers these protected categories against discrimination, and there is nothing in there that should permit this kind of Christianophobia to be taking place. So I am beginning, and if anyone's watching and they're interested to join me and know more, but I am beginning myself now to organize a campaign, a movement to try and redress this imbalance in terms of the discrimination that the Christians experience that other people of faith do not. Sorry, Father Tom, you were going to say something.
Well, I mean, I just got a few minutes before I have to get back into work. And just to kind of comment on all this, it's like, well, of course, when you look at the Pope, when you look at other prelates, when you look at the Christian people and leaders of the world, worldwide, we're doormats. We're supposed to just lay down and take it, because our leadership's not standing up for it. And the faithful, the sheep follow the shepherd. And if the shepherd's not strong in the faith and have conviction to say what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong, the sheep aren't going to do it because they don't know. We've had 60 plus years of the dumbing down, watering down of the real Catholic faith to this point. And this is, I mean, you can go into infiltration, you can go on all that conspiracy stuff, but this is set up. And if people don't get that this is set up, because when we get attacked, we just have to take it. Now, I have done, and Bishop Kelly and yourself, you know, I've had a few little battles in my workplace when I've stood my ground. And guess what? When you stand your ground, when you present a case reasonably, they listen to you. And you normally, most of the time, you get your way. You know, I talk to my management about Christian holidays, fasting days, and all this stuff. And they're receptive to it. They have no problem with it. They don't fight with me on it. But the problem is most Christians don't know they have a right to practice their faith outside of four little walls. Yeah. They don't. They're afraid to. Yeah. When you know, and they don't know how to go about things the right way. You know, you see all this chaos and the riots and the looting and the protest or peaceful protesting. Sorry, and you see all this taking place in cities. Christians get the idea that if we even try to protest or do a march or do something to make a public awareness, we're just going to be called and labeled like the rest of the people that are doing destructive things, which to a point they have, because they're afraid to be roped in and to be called all the negative litanies possible. And they don't want added persecution to the persecution they're already taking. So they just accept the silence of it. It's a silent white martyrdom, if you will, for those that are enduring the red martyrdom, taking on the red martyrdom. And
you see, I totally agree with everything you're saying. I just wanted to say that there was one Christian chap here, and I can't remember exactly the scenario, but he tried making a stand and taking his employer to a tribunal, and the judge turned round and said, but you don't have to do that as a Christian. Only some Christians do that.
And that's the thing. When we have lost the Orthodox faith, when we have a pope that wants to be in the brotherhood of man rather than in the communion of God, and that's why Muslims can walk all over us. It's because we have a pope that pretty much says we worship the same God, and we're no different. And when you have that going on in the world, how can you even justify it? It's like when you're trying to talk reason and sense and truth, you can't, because they're just going to say, well, your pope says this, or you don't have to do this, like you said, and that's the problem we face. We're fighting a two-front battle. You know how well two-front battles work.
Yeah, Bishop Kelly.
Yeah, no, it just occurs to me. Of course, I mean, there is a discrimination with contemporary Western society against Christianity. It's clear. They don't respect it. They scoff at it, and they openly discriminate against it. That the judge in his ruling said that you don't have to do that. Could you imagine a scenario where and you mentioned earlier about a Muslim woman wearing hijab at work, and the employer forbade it, and the judge saying the same thing? There are Muslims that don't. You don't have to wear hijab. It's not in the Quran. Could you imagine that? Never in a month of Sundays.
Yeah.
Or Fridays, sorry.
Yeah.
You just couldn't. It's so blatantly obvious, and yet they get away with it. We don't stand up. And I think Father Thomas is right. We lack leadership. There is no strong leadership.
Yeah.
And what do you expect? Everything has been watered down. We don't even have our holy days anymore. They've all been moved to Sundays. We should stand up and have our holy days off. It's the same as the Jews and the Muslims and anyone else. But we don't. And the other thing, too, is where are the Christians? You know, they take a survey. The BBC goes out into urban and rural England, and they say, you know, are you a Christian? People say, oh yes, I'm a Christian. You know, when's the last time you were at church? Your baptism? You know, you're not a Christian. You don't believe it. You're not. You don't. Unless you attend weekly mass or service, you're not an active Christian. But they see these people, and you know, they're apathetic because they have no faith. But what about the devout Christians? What about the Christians who practice their faith, who believe the tenets of the gospel? You know, we need to be afforded our rights, and we need to stand up for them, and we need to have leadership. And I thank God that you will start a campaign on this, because we need to stand up. If we don't stand up, we won't be counted, we won't be respected. And in this era of wokeness, in this era of non-discrimination, I think it's a perfect opportunity to shine the light back in their faces and say,
yeah,
and
exactly.
I think out of all of the things, this may get some traction, because when you compare it to their sacred cows, that's not a reference to Hinduism, of their acquiescence towards Islam and Judaism, because they seem to hold these two other faith systems above anything else. They don't seem to hold Hinduism, which I just mentioned, on the same sort of level. But there seems to be some sort of honor given, place of honor given to Islam and Judaism. It's not afforded anybody else. Perhaps Buddhism, but I don't think so. I think those two are, because they're in the news. You know, you had the thing there with Labour recently and their anti-Semitism.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you have this sort of underreporting of Islamic attacks because they don't want to paint them in a bad fashion. But I think if anything can get traction, this might be it.
Yeah, and of course the thing about the regard that is given to Judaism and Islam is largely because of the conflation of ethnicity and race and culture with the religion.
Yeah.
So that, you know, people think, well, it's difficult to differentiate between you know, Jewish and Muslim adherents and their races or their culture. Whereas actually, of course, you know, Bangladeshi Muslims are as different from Saudi Arabian Muslims as you know, I can't think of anything, but you know what I'm saying. And yet they're all, you know, generally sort of regarded as an amorphous whole, as an amorphous mass. But whenever we as Christians try to assert our cultural living experience of the faith, bearing in mind which gives the historical often background to the whole concept of a holiday, anyway, the whole concept of even work ethic, etc., etc. We're the ones who are told, oh no, you have to, what you do, what you believe, and what your persona is at work, and what your persona is in your personal life, and blah blah. It's all, you have to separate all those things out. That's what we're told as Christians. We're expected, you know, oh well, no, your Christianity, that's your private belief thing. Right. You know, when you're at work, you're an employee first. That's what we're told. Yeah. Whereas the others, it's accepted that their religion is part of their identity, is part of their culture, and part of their ethnicity and race. And that, therefore, to attack their identity would be, of course, a heinous sin.
Perhaps if we change the terms, that Christianity is not my belief, it's my feeling. We might get...
Maybe, or it might just get more confusing. Brother Stanislavs, what are your thoughts?
I do have to get going, guys. I do apologize. Right. So God bless everyone.
Bless you. Thank you, Father Tom. Take care. Have a safe shift.
Bye.
God bless. Oh, we've gone Dallas. Hold on. There we are.
I have a bit of a different take on all of this, and it's I haven't fleshed it out enough, but I'll give you my thoughts. This is the church's fault. What's happening in France, when I read about that, it reminded me of I forget when it was. It may maybe decades ago, when the Muslims had spray painted somewhere in France, "We will conquer through the womb." And I always remember that because they're serious. That's how they will conquer Christians, is to continue having children. And we used to be like that. Of course, our idea wasn't to conquer, but we had the idea of being open to life. And I think that Christianity here in the United States is about winning. And if we're not winning, if the Christians aren't winning, then there's why be a member of that church or that community if they don't show that they're winning. And what I mean by that is, no one wants to stand up and say, "Hey, this is wrong, and I'm not going to take it anymore." Why? Because we'll get our throat slit. That's why. We'll get beat up. We'll get met in the parking lot by Muslim extremists, which in Detroit, has the largest Muslim community in the United States. And they're here. And I get the looks, and I see it. And they're ready. Boy, if a light was turned on tomorrow, there'd be an army of Muslims here in Michigan, ready to fight and kill for what they believe. Now, we're supposed to be the same way. I mean, I have often said it's far past the time for another crusade. I mean, several years ago, President George W. Bush used that in one of his speeches to the State of the Union speeches, that it was in time for another crusade, and it got buried. And I don't know that, of course, maybe they're not going to look like the first 4 crusades, but something needs to be done. Like, I agree with Bishop Kelly. Why didn't the Pope immediately declare them martyrs? Because our Orthodox brethren are much better at stuff like that.
Oh,
when someone dies that they know we're holy, or they believe to be.
Yeah, the Coptics would have done it straight away.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's the example. You have the Holy Father saying, these are martyrs. Immediately they'll say, why? Those who don't know will say, well, let me explain to you why. And that's the example of the faith. And going back to this idea of winning, and people that I talk to that are seeking counsel, one of the things I remind them of is that we're not going to win. Not here. That's not what we're here for. We're not here to win. We're here to remain faithful, to practice what we associate with, because it's about the state of our soul. Here, I'm sure, Excellency, we're about ready to go elect a president again. And one of the campaigns, their whole mantra is fighting for the soul of America. But their policies don't match that. And I don't think, I've also shared with some friends that I believe that, now I happen to believe Donald Trump's going to be reelected, but I believe he's going to be the last true American president. That after him, we're heading for some rough times. If the Christians will just simply stand up. And there are some, I mean, I see it. I mean, I'm recalling this, some of the pro-life people, an old man a couple years ago got beat up outside one of the clinics here in Detroit. He wasn't doing anything except doing what he does every Saturday, standing out in front of the clinic and praying. But he got beat up. Now, I'm pretty sure nothing happened to the people that perpetrated that act, because the man just said, well, I'm here to witness for life for our Lord. He was steadfast. He knows why he's there. And going back to what Father Thomas was saying, and I think has been a theme, that when the Christian people, the Catholic people, are not properly catechized, not even close. Even, I hate to say it, even the bishops. I was reading an article from one of my former professors He's now the director of the Angelicum, the Thomistic Society in Rome at the Angelicum. And I thought it was a very thoughtful paper, and it was about the sacraments during the pandemic and what do we do. And one of the things that he mentioned was you have to want to celebrate. You have to want to go. You know, there's the Christian people, the flock has to show up at the door and demand the sacraments. But the bishops, like here in Detroit, which is my only example, we've been shut up for months now. Before the Archbishop allowed Holy Mass to be said publicly again, you could not find an open church anywhere, not to pray, not to visit. And Father White in this article makes the point that we have a right to the sacraments because it's about our soul. And that while it's important to think about all these other things, our soul is number one. You know, our soul. And so I think what he was saying was, what I believe is that the bishops are wrong. You must find a way to provide the sacraments to the people in a safe way. And I think we can do that, especially now. But that hasn't happened. And even still now, it's not happening. So I see it in a different way. I see it as just another sign of what is to come, that we are not meant to win. This is not our world. We are meant to stay focused and steadfast on the supernatural and to be examples of that to all of those who are out there and they don't know. But there really isn't. There aren't examples. Detroit's a pretty spread out place, and I think that I'm fair, but over and over and over again, we can't find examples. And so what do? Well, if you want to be an example, I know a lot of, we call them traditionalists, and a lot of times they are attracted to the exterior things, not so much the internal things. And so I've challenged many traditionalists, are you ready to give your life? Would you give your life for the faith right now? Because it's going to happen, as both of you have said. And they won't. But see, I think that's where I think that I agree with what I heard of what Bishop Kelly was offering, is that the only way to change the narrative is to have more martyrs.
Yeah. And
I don't know that that's going to happen.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, if this is good. Actually, this will be a good segue into a little commercial break. But if you haven't already, this week's edition of the Old Roman has been published, and in it, the Old Roman View, the editorial comment there is discussing actually this particular story, this particular topic, and the nature of how we as Christians should respond. And if anyone watched Contra Mundum, my conference last night on Ecce Homo, I was saying there that basically, as it were, we have actually hundreds of thousands of martyrs in just the past 2 decades. The shocking thing is that how many Christians in the West, particularly, can name a single one of those martyrs. Now, when you think of the first 3 centuries of the church's life, where we worshipped amongst the remains of the martyrs, which is why to this day holy relics are encased within our altars. The martyrs' names, their stories, their witness, their testimony became legend. And that's why we who offer the traditional Mass are still commemorating 2,000 years later names of individuals, some of whom's testimony and witness has been lost in the midst of time. Names even in the canon of the Mass, so sacred, whose life and witness, clearly their testimony was so great that they were included in the canon. But the trouble is, today, we as Christians, we don't celebrate our martyrs. We don't talk about our martyrs. We don't share the story of our contemporary martyrs. And, you know, and this is why I made the point earlier in introducing this topic of mentioning the name of Vincent Locke and of Simone Barra de Silva, because we should know their names, and we should be sharing details about their life. These, if only to emphasize their humanity, that they're not just victims, but they were practicing Catholics. I mean, they were going to Mass, and they had families. You know, they were connected individuals. They're members of the community, of the worshipping community of Notre Dame, but also of their communities in Nice. And that's why it's important, and why we should, as contemporary Christians, learn and celebrate and share these testimonies and these witnesses. This is the level, you see, of apostasy, basically, and apathy in the church today. That you know, it's almost as if we get, you know, as you know, the British Home Office report says, Christian martyrdom is reaching genocidal levels globally. But the way Christians, particularly in the West, behave, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't think that. It's not as if, you know, when you go to Mass, people say to you, have you heard the latest? Have you heard about this Christian in Pakistan and how they were martyred? Have you heard about how these Coptics were martyred? Have you heard how these people in France were martyred? And as Bishop Kelly was, you know, as you rightly say, when even the Pope, when even the Bishop of Rome, the supposed vicar of Christ, doesn't, you know, only mentions them in bleak terms and doesn't even affirm, as brother says, their status as martyrs, even when there can be no doubt of their being martyrs. I mean, it's not as if we have to even contemplate the question of baptism of desire or baptism of blood. They were baptized members of the church. They were martyred for their faith. Why hasn't he declared them as martyrs? And what, you know, we were talking about the paucity of catechism. What a brilliant opportunity this would be for him as pastor of souls to teach the whole church what martyrdom is, and to make it real, you know, again, because I'm sure that part of the problem is, for so long we've had it good, we think, for so long here in the West, that we tend to think of martyrdom as being something that happened, you know, maybe 500 years ago during the Reformation. Maybe that was the last sort of period of martyrdom that people in the West generally think of. And yet the numbers of martyrs, of Christian martyrs, in these two centuries, so the 21st and the 20th century, more Christians have been martyred for the faith than in any other period of history, and then higher than all of those other periods of history put together. So when we talk, as we do, of course, in the traditional liturgy about and the traditional church about the great persecution under Diocletian, right, which is talking back to when? 250 to 300 AD. You've got Datius and then Diocletian, etc. And we're talking about the great persecution then. We talk about before that, perhaps nominal references in Revelation to the persecution under Trajan, at the turn of the 2nd century. You don't hear Christians talking about the millions of Christians that were martyred in the 20th century. And you certainly don't hear Christians talking about the 9 million Christians that have been martyred in the first 2 decades of this century. That's the issue. That's the problem. That this notion, the teaching of St. Paul, that though we are many, we are one body, and that where one suffers, all suffers, where one is glorified, all are glorified. There's no concept of that in the church today. It's very much a case of, that happens in places like Africa and the Middle East. It's got nothing to do with us. And that's the real tragedy, I think, too, of the Catholic experience today, is that lack of universality in identity. And of course, I can't help but think that, when you took away the Latin and everything became vernacular, everything became localized, then that sense of the universal was taken away. It's yeah. This is the situation of the church now in the 21st century. It really is. There's no catechesis, there's no common identity, there's no common purpose. We've lost our traditions, we've lost our customs, we've lost our identity. What is the point? Some might even ask. And I say, and have been saying, as you know, in recent weeks particularly, but for the last 2 years, especially in all my conferences and homilies, the change has to begin with the individual. It has to be the personal conversion and personal holiness and the personal witness and the personal testimony. It has to be that each and every single Christian is recognizable as an ambassador of Christ. And that is how change will happen, because seeing Christ in us is what will draw people to him, to God, and to reconciliation and then peace. And that's how the world will change. That's how the church spread from a dozen men to a 2,000-year institution. But we cannot allow this living tradition to die out. And that's very much the raison d'etre of us as old Romans, is to keep the faith alive, to keep the church alive. Commercial break. Okay. We've lost Bishop Kelly. Not quite sure if that's a technical issue or whether he's had to go. Yeah, no. Okay. What are your hopes or fears, Brother Stanislaus, concerning the event that's coming up this week for your nation?
You mean our election? Well, I am a supporter of the president, and I think there are many Christians, maybe even Catholics, who question that. But he is pro-life, and we haven't had that in my lifetime. Reagan was there, but it was just beginning at the time of Reagan. So this is we have a new Supreme Court justice who is, she's not a sort of Catholic, but she's certainly a deep believer, as opposed to maybe a couple of the other Catholics on the Supreme Court. So it's going to be war is what's going to happen. It's going to be, I can get in the frame. It's going to be, just I don't know if you've seen these articles where you are, but Washington, D.C., Seattle, Atlanta, the places in Florida, in Texas, they're already boarding up government buildings. They're already blocking off the government buildings in these cities. Why? Because of what could happen Wednesday or Thursday when we find out who won the presidency. If Joe Biden wins, the right is not going to come out and cause riots, but the left will, and they're already doing it. And like many of the things you touched on earlier, it's not being covered by the mass media. So my hope is for a peaceful re-election of this president. My fear is that it's going to be anything but that. He's going to be re-elected, but there's going to be a lot of what we've seen already in so many cities rioting. And it's such a, these are the same people who spoke out against these types of things just maybe even yesterday. But because their truth that they hold to is not going to be affirmed by the re-election of Donald Trump, then no one's truth matters. And I think that's the central, even the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who is Catholic, it's all about her truth. It's all about Biden's truth. They say we're practicing Catholics, we're devout Catholics, but no one ever challenges them. I don't know, a couple of years ago, Pelosi quoted St. Augustine about the right to for women to have an abortion. And of course, I would have challenged. I said, one is that I know St. Augustine. We did think. I think that it was called the quickening. That the soul was not present in the child, the fetus, until the quickening, which I think we thought happened at 3 or 4 months, something like that. And so she cited that as a reason. We know better now, and there's no challenge to them. There's no if they get in, and there's certainly a chance that they will. We're going to see such a radical change in this country that it's going to affect the entire world. It's going to be the beginning of what I think is already in process. I like Donald Trump, but I think he doesn't realize he's being used by God. He's an instrument. He thinks it's him. And I recognize that. I'm not looking to vote in a saint for president. But I think he doesn't realize, I think, that he's being used that way, and that's okay. But he is, I think, going to his reelection will usher in the final chapter of what we've always known as American democracy, because the left is going to go crazy, and I don't think they're going to stop.
Yeah, I mean, you see, I mean, it's anybody could see that, you know, in 2016 it was the losers of that election who began rioting, and basically they've been rioting ever since. They have never accepted the result of the 2016 election, and I think it's, you know, I just thought I was just incredulous when they started this narrative a month ago of asking Trump if, you know, if he lost, would he, you know, would there be a peaceful handover of power, etc. And you just think, what a nerve, what a cheek, when these guys have, you know, time and time again tried impeaching him, they've tried accusing him of all sorts of things, and yet you know, nothing sticks. In the sense of nothing stinks that actually makes a difference. You know, he was not impeached. They couldn't impeach him. Now, you know, as we've said many times before on this program, there are a lot of things not right and undesirable about Mr. Trump. But compared to those who claim to be Catholics in politics on the other side, you know, it's. I mean, as Bishop Kelly has said before, you don't have to vote for Trump, but you cannot vote for Biden as a Catholic.
To me, that's good catechesis, and I have met good Catholics who I believe to be good, staunch Catholics, families. And I had a conversation with a gentleman a few days ago, and he's got 17 children, and so he's always taught them that the lesser of two evil theory, and that you have to vote for somebody, meaning that the lesser of two evils. And I had to explain to him, I said, that's not right. You know, we have a responsibility to participate in the electoral process, but I don't have to vote for anybody because, you know, like Joe Biden, I would never vote for him. But maybe there's a reason not to vote for the president either, except that he's done precisely what he said he's going to do. And we have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, and maybe some of this nonsense will start to stop now. But I know Donald Trump is not, he thinks he's the savior. Okay, I know he's not, but he thinks he is. I think he thinks himself as the new Constantine, to be honest with you. And, you know, thank God we have term limits, because I think he is that type. He would stay until he died if he could figure out a way. But, you know, I find that charming. I don't find it something that, you know, you can't elect a man. You know. Well, the opposite is true with Joe Biden.
Yeah. Bishop Kelly, are you worried about next week and the result?
I didn't come in at the beginning of this conversation, so I don't know what the premise of it is, because your commercial break kicked me out, and I couldn't figure out how to get back in again. So I had to go back to the initial link, and then anyway.
All right.
The results. I'm worried about the results on two levels. On the overall effect on the next 4 years and the direction of the country, and I'm also worried about the reaction to a result which is practical. I mean, just as many other major cities around the U.S., the Chicago has been affected by looting and rioting, and you know, the destruction of personal property. So yes, it is worrisome as to what's going to transpire on Tuesday. Although I don't believe that we might know on Tuesday. It may take several weeks. But what does sort of concern me a little bit is the fact that this notion of violence or rioting coming from the left is sort of it's not said, but it's implicit threat. Nobody has come out and said, if we don't get our way, we're going to burn this place down. However, it's implicit. And I think that's very insidious method that they're tolerating. I mean, the left should come out and say, absolutely, whatever the result. Now, like you mentioned, when they asked Mr. Trump, if you lose the election, will you leave office peacefully? They should ask the left, if you don't get the result you like, will you not burn the place down?
Well, but you see, I mean, Trump, of course, was asking Biden that in the town halls to condemn Antifa and the BLM riots, and Biden wouldn't.
Antifa's just an idea.
Yeah, and we've an idea that people like Maxine, is it Maxine Waters? Is that her name? Walters, something like that. Maxine Waters.
Yeah.
You can find on YouTube and all over the internet her basically, inciting people to violence and to rioting. Pelosi too has used similar rhetoric. Trump has never used language or rhetoric like that. The most is, they've tried to infer that he is implied. Disguised threats like by using a phrase like "stand by" or or whatever. But in comparison to the footage of them, in encouraging people to riot, basically, and inciting people to, I just find it also incredulous, really.
No, it really is. I mean, what has really? If you didn't get it before, look, I'm new to American politics. I became a citizen just a number of years ago. I was able to vote in the election, which was Obama's second term. This is the first election I could vote in. But I became aware then at the end of Obama's term that when there was the Democratic primaries, I became aware of the hatchet job that the Democrat Party and the mainstream media and CNN, etc., how they turned on Bernie Sanders, how they maligned him, how they sidelined him, that the narrative was skewed in favor of Hillary, and even to the detriment of Joe Biden. Obama wouldn't stand by Joe Biden, even though traditionally there's this notion that the vice president would then run, after the president is gone. That support wasn't there. Hillary was obviously the anointed one to succeed, and all parts of the machine worked to do that. And it became clear to me, perhaps, I think it's blatant now, but perhaps because of my own upbringing, I know propaganda, I know politics very well, but it was plain as the nose on my face that that this is what was happening. It was completely orchestrated against Bernie Sanders. And then you get into the whole, Trump as a candidate was a complete surprise. But then you get the machine going again. And I think they were shocked as anyone when Trump won. Now, they're not trying to hide it. It's blatantly obvious. They're not reporting major stories. Media blackout. You have platforms like Twitter and Facebook, completely burying stories, shutting down people's accounts. I mean, the fourth widest read newspaper in this country, their account was shut down on Twitter.
Yeah, outrageous.
You know, any other country, that could be okay, but part of the constitution of this country is freedom of the press. You know, it's just, if you don't see it, I don't know what's wrong with you. It doesn't mean you have to vote one way or the other as a citizen, but at least look at what's happening. At least be aware of what's happening. But they won't let you see it.
Yeah.
So it really, I mean, it's like the worst days of the USSR, talking about the control the media has and propaganda. It is blatant propaganda.
This is before they've won.
Right.
Imagine. I mean, if they're doing this now.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah. It is absolutely frightening. And there's a contrarian thing. I mean, politics aside, if all things were sort of equal, or that alone would make me want to vote for the underdog, you know, because you know, it's what have they got to hide? You know, what's the motive here? What is the why are they so afraid of it? There must be something good in this fella that they don't want us to vote for. You know, I don't know. I think it's going to be an eventful week ahead here. I'm enjoying the countryside and the isolation now, but I have to go back to the city tomorrow, and you know, who knows what'll happen.
Brother Stanislaus, can I ask you just to move to your right?
I can.
Just to get you into the center,
Sure.
of the frame. Sure. That's better. I think we get a much clearer picture of the three of us then this way. Well, you know, I haven't got a donkey in this race, obviously. But personally, you know, I can say as an objective observer that the Democrats are just as corrupt as all hell. Their tactics and their rhetoric and what they stand for is just appalling. Just appalling. I mean, I haven't forgotten, you know, the debacle post-election fallout of Hillary Clinton in 2016. And, you know, it was bizarre how things that actually she was accused of and that she had done was suddenly being transferred to Trump. And it's, well, how can that be? You know, this collusion with Russia and this problem with emails, and you know, and as for finances and finance deals, you know, before Biden and Biden Jr., you know, and the things that people forget, you know, let's not forget that Biden was vice president when Clinton was Secretary of State, and they stood by and allowed their ambassador in Benghazi to be blown up.
Yes.
And
right.
And you guys,
sorry, my dog's getting...
some of you guys want these sorts of people to rule your country.
But look, also, you know, another two quick points just to go back to what Brother said. You know, Nancy Pelosi and her, you know, her use of Augustine, or she could have used Aquinas too, about the quickening of the child in the womb. You know, how can she quote either two of those doctors of the church now that she supports abortion up until birth? Because I mean, she's lost them there, and the same as Biden. Biden's actually voted on it, as has Kamala Harris. that, and not only have they voted on abortion up to birth, they've also voted against providing what do you call it? Anesthesia to the child that's about to be destroyed, and yet, these extreme views, and they are extreme, that you have in this new film about Francesco, which we had the bombshell of the civil unions there, but he openly supports Biden in this movie.
I know.
It's a propaganda piece for Biden, and Biden just 2 days ago quoted Pope Francis in one of his rallies. I mean,
I know.
I'm just speechless over it. Speechless.
I know. It's and he will allow airtime to rubbish like all that civil union malarkey, and has barely a dozen words to say about Christian martyrs.
Right. Yeah.
It just defies. Yeah.
And it really does. I mean, you have to really stop yourself from running down the conspiracy theorist rabbit holes of, this new world order. And I'm starting to double think now,
The Great Reset.
Hold on a minute. The Great Reset, right? Okay.
But this is the thing. I mean, I know exactly what you're saying, because I am in no way a conspiracy theorist. And yet, it does make you ask. I mean, it
really does.
And it certainly makes you, it's certainly for me, I almost shared something yesterday, which I'm glad I second guessed it and did a little more digging, because subsequently it turned out, the claim was false. But when I say the claim was false, but only sort of barely.
I was going to say false, but yet maybe not.
Well, what it was, the assertion was that a year ago, Donald Trump had signed a coronavirus care. It was called the CARE Act. It was a coronavirus relief. Blah blah blah. Anyway, it turns out that coronavirus wasn't actually the name of the of the act that was signed off. Except, however, this act did provide up to $6 trillion worth of emergency funding to use and implement to use and in the implementation of a pandemic, etc. I mean, I don't know. Is that coincidental? I mean, it does make you ask, because actually, aside from the title, everything else in the report that this guy was making was true. Everything else was there. The $6 trillion was there. It was all about relief against a pandemic and so on and so forth. All of that was true. It's just the title that was off. He misinterpreted the title, but it does make you think. It does make you, well, hold on a minute. And there's beginning to be a lot of that now.
Yeah.
And it is difficult, there are lots of people, for example, this week, Archbishop Vigano again has written a letter to Trump, and he's warning about this great reset, and so on and so forth. Well, some people are now saying, Vigano's a lone wolf, blah blah blah. But it has to be said that actually,
or is he the voice crying in the wilderness?
well, as he describes himself. But also, so far, much of everything that Vigano has said has been subsequently proved correct.
Yeah.
That's a question, I think, that when do conspiracies, as we may point them out, when do we start to recognize there's truth? Because I think that a lot of times we do, where, there are some far out ideas or far out predictions, and I think they get labeled conspiracies. But then, like as you've been noticing, oh, wait a minute, this is true, this is true, this is true, this is true. Maybe this one is not so true, but at some point, because one of the things that I like to say or to point out is that this is gonna happen. The world is going to lose. The world is going to pass away, and maybe sooner than what we think. And so that's why, for me, internal preparation is the key. And because you can use that anyway, we need that anyway. But so for me, maybe it's not getting up and having a group of people protest it over there. I'll say, come in. Let's practice the faith. Let's make sure that you know what you're practicing. And then let's hope through this guidance and prayer that you come to realize how valuable this is, and that you too would give up your life in order to continue practicing that which is really the only truth. But that's why I look at our country and I shake my head. No, it's not going to happen. We're too far gone. Even Catholics, I mean, the majority, like our new Supreme Court justice, she's, from everything I could see, she seems to be a very good practicing Novus Ordo Catholic. So guess what? She's going to have some ideas about equality and fairness to all people. As my old pastor used to say, even the QBLTs, whatever they call them, that they deserve, as the Holy Father has said, they deserve some recognition, dignity. And who's going to stand up and go, whoa, wait a minute. That's not what we're talking about. We cannot affirm that which is false. You can't do that. And I think American Catholics, Novus Ordo Catholics, that's where they go. They're beginning to affirm the false, because that's the argument. When you have Pelosi and Biden and all these people, I say the rosary every day, I go to mass every day, and here's what I believe. Yes, there should be civil unions. Then you have the Pope come out and affirm that, yes, there should be civil unions. Is there a way back? And I don't know. It'd be nice to think. I mean, I for one, I didn't live in the 50s, but I certainly like to go back and look and say, people left their doors unlocked. Everybody went to church on Sunday. All the stores were closed on Sunday. It was a day to devote to God. And, at least here in this country, everybody did. Everyone went to church. It was, it used to be, you wore your best. And as Father was saying earlier, they got this from the Catholics, about Sunday dress and preparing. And, and in the old days, the fasting was from midnight. Can you imagine? They'd never make it to 10 o'clock mass, the noon mass, or later. That's why the 6:30 mass was always so crowded. People have been fasting since midnight. But today's Catholics wouldn't make it. They are not made for martyrdom. They're not. Well, maybe some of us are. And it's simply not me. It doesn't come from me. It's the recognition of knowing, hey, give me martyrdom. If I get the chance, I'm not going to run to it. But, oh my goodness, I'll go straight to heaven.
Yeah. Oh, I'd embrace it.
Yeah.
Seriously, I'd embrace it. I think, as one famous saint said, the road to hell is paved with the skulls of bishops and priests. So if Marston came my way, that'd be my ticket. I'll take that.
But like you said, the stories, we read in the office, reading the martyrdom, the martyrology every day, and sometimes it does take a while. Like with us, we read the Roman martyrology as well as the Marian Book of the Dead, all the priests and brothers who have gone before us. So sometimes it does take a few minutes, but those stories are beautiful of what they went through, what they did, the witness, the conversions that happened. And we've seen it here. I mean, we've seen it in relatively modern times. But that's what I think. I think most Novus Ordo Catholics look for miracles. They look for signs. And if they don't see that, then they don't want to be around. But if you show them that, boy, they'll pack the house. But the regular everyday prayer and Holy Mass, they're not interested in that.
But, as Christ said of those Jews in his time who thought similarly, a faithless generation. You ask for signs, you ask for wonders. Why? You don't recognize what's even in your midst. And you don't deserve it anyway. Because, you're not about God, you're not about personal holiness, you're not about sacrifice. Well, I think we'll leave things there. Oh,
just before
Bishop
we go,
Kelly,
I just want to recognize that I agree with Brother when he said he wants to get back to the 50s. I would just stipulate the 1350s. Because everyone went to church then.
Yeah,
and their doors were unlocked, except if you lived in a castle.
Yeah, and that was a relatively peaceful-ish time, or was it? Was that during the Great Schism? Was that the Western Schism?
It's
Is that
after
the time of the three popes? Is that around the Avignon papacy?
It's before Avignon.
Yeah.
Is it just before Avignon? Yeah.
Maybe we need another Avignon papacy. Certainly wouldn't be Avignon, but it's like France.
Well, we've kind of got one now.
Yeah.
Look at the theology you've got. You've got, your post-Aquinas. Look at the architecture, the height of the Gothic building, the flourishing of Christianity.
Early Renaissance. Well, it's coming.
It's coming. Give it a bit.
Give it a bit for the art. Yeah. I had a similar conversation actually with another priest by text a couple of weeks ago. We were sort of waxing lyrical along the similar theme. Although I said I did wonder whether I'd prefer sort of just post-Reformation, counter-Reformation. I mean, I would love to have worked with. I would love to have worked as an oratorian with some Philip Neri. I would love that, and I think his humour and mine, I think we'd have got on very well.
Would you be willing to shave half your beard and walk around town?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well. That's a much longer show than we've ever done before. Bless you, those of you who have stayed to and who have watched it throughout. And hopefully it was interesting. Perhaps Bishop Kelly, as usual, you will give us your blessing before we part.
The Lord be with you,
and with thy spirit.
May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost descend upon you and remain with you forever. Amen.
Amen. Well, as we said last week, if you enjoyed that show, that was Old Romans Unscripted. If you're not so sure, it was something else. Bless you for watching. We're here same time next week. Now, next week, of course, will be a sort of special edition. So hopefully, Brother Stanislaus, you'll be available, and hopefully Bishop Kelly, because, of course, it is St. Willibrord's Day next week. And we, as Old Romans, of course, owe everything in one respect to St Willibrord's early mission to the Frisians, not the cows, to the Netherlands. Another cow metaphor.
I don't think we have many Frisian cows in the United States, so
no.
it wasn't lost on me.
So yes, it's a greater double for us as Old Romans, a great feast day. Of course, it's falling within the octave of All Saints, and the octave day, of course, will be the next day. Don't forget this week, All Souls on Monday. It's not all over. Tomorrow, All Souls on Monday, and don't forget that November is the month of All Holy Souls. Indulgence, you can gain a whole indulgence following the usual criteria during the octave of All Saints by visiting cemeteries and praying for the departed. You can get a partial indulgence, of course, the rest of the month. So look into that. I meant to bring that up and I forgot. Yes, Bishop Kelly.
And just to mention too, I know it's a recent craze that people give up alcohol for October, sober October, but more traditionally, at least at home in Ireland, tradition is to give up alcohol as a fast to aid the holy souls in purgatory, and it makes perfect sense. It's a great way to prepare for the glut of the season to come. So it's no harm physically. It's certainly beneficial spiritually. So, give up that, give it up completely, give up that extra pint, whatever you can do, offer it up for the suffering of the holy souls in purgatory.
Well, in fact, of course, there's Martin Mass coming soon on the 11th of November, where it was traditional for some to start an early Advent of fasting and sacrifice. That maybe is worth something to do, especially in the current time, and perhaps post-election too. And also, this week. We've got some great feasts coming in the octave of All Saints. There's All Holy Relics this week. St Leonard of Limoges, a wonderful hermit. St Charles Borromeo, St Winifred of Holywell. Some great feasts falling during this octave of All Saints. So don't forget, daily Mass is broadcast every day at 8:30. The Angelus twice daily. And also a daily recitation of the Rosary, interactive, where you can ask prayers and intentions and share them with others. So look out for those broadcasts too. So bless you all. Thank you. God bless. And we'll see you online very soon.